Old age is a house filled with memories where no guests come. In my 77 years, I have internalized this truth all too well. For 5 years now, my mornings have started the same way. I wake up in an empty bed and stare at the picture of Winifred on my bedside table. This morning is no exception. Her smile, frozen in time, seems to say, "Good morning, Cormac," but it's only an echo in my head. I've lived in Lancaster all my life. This old house on Chesterfield Road has seen me grow up, get married, my son born. Winifred and I meet old age, and how she left me, leaving me alone with the silence. 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, a library. It used to be noisy and fun. Now I only use 3 rooms: the bedroom, the kitchen, and the living room. The others stand locked up like museum pieces from the past. As I walk down the creaky stairs, I notice a layer of dust on the banister. Winifred never used to let this happen before. But now, what's the use of trying if no one comes? Except for Mrs. Pemberton, the neighbor, who drops by once a week with homemade baked goods and a chat about the weather. In the kitchen, I make my usual tea, strong, with 1 spoonful of sugar. Winifred always said I make tea like I want to kill someone with the strength. The thought makes me smile. 38 years of marriage, and she's never been able to accustom me to normal tea. Outside the window, it's a gray Lancaster day. The rain drizzles so softly you can barely hear it, but the drops slowly drip down the glass, leaving winding paths. Like life, going its own way, inexorably, drop by drop. My gaze falls on the wall calendar. Saturday, October 15th. I circle the date with a red marker. Knox is due today. Due is the key word. Lately, our meetings have become an exercise in making excuses. "Sorry, Dad. Busy. Inoka's not feeling well. We have an important dinner with her co-workers. Knox is my only son. We used to be close. I taught him to fish, to build birdhouses, to repair an old car. He sat with me in my geology lab, mesmerized by the mineral samples I brought back from expeditions. I told him about tectonic plates, about the formation of mountains, about how to read the history of the earth from rocks. He listened with his mouth open. Winifred used to joke that we had the same eyes when we were engrossed, like mad scientists. Everything changed after Winifred died. She was the heart of our family, the link between my son and me. When cancer took her 5 years ago, it was like a wall grew between us. Maybe I got too caught up in my grief, shut myself away. Or maybe Knox was just going his own way. Either way, our intimacy had thinned to occasional phone calls and even more infrequent visits. And then there she was, Enoka Preston, a slender blonde with cold blue eyes and a calculated smile, an editor at the publishing house where Knox worked as a proofreader. They met at some corporate event. I still remember their first visit together. She was looking at the house with an appraising eye, as if estimating its value. It was 2 months before their wedding. "What a lovely house, Mr. Blackwood," she said then. "So much history, so many memories." But in her eyes, I saw only calculation. I know that look. In 40 years of exploration, I've learned to recognize people who see not the beauty of a stone, but its market value. Our first meeting set the tone for all that followed. Inoka was always impeccably polite to me, but that politeness hid an emptiness. She never asked me questions about my life, never inquired about my past or present. I was only Knox's father to her, an adjunct to the house and possible inheritance. Knox changed after marriage. His world began to revolve around Inoka, her career, her ambitions. He moved to a new job, now doing financial analysis for a large company, on his father-in-law's recommendation. He started wearing expensive suits and talking about things he hadn't been interested in before. Investments, markets, real estate. I finish my tea and look at my watch. 11:30. Knox promised to be here for dinner. I start cooking. Roast beef, his favorite since childhood. At least something hasn't changed. Meat, rosemary, garlic, a little red wine. Winifred's recipe, which I've memorized over the years. At 2:30, the phone rings. I wipe my hands and pick up the receiver, already knowing what I'm going to hear. "Dad, it's Knox." "Hello, son." I try to keep my voice upbeat. "I'm expecting you for dinner. I'm making your favorite roast beef." Pause. I hear a sigh. About that, I'm afraid I can't make it tonight. Inoki has a big reception. We have to get ready. The new director of the publishing house is invited. It's very important for her career. I close my eyes. It's a familiar scenario. I understand, I say, though I haven't really understood it for a long time. Maybe some other time. Sure, Dad. Maybe next week? I'll call, but he won't, at least not on his own initiative, and we both know it. After the conversation, I sit back in my chair and look at the table I've prepared. White tablecloths, my grandmother's china, a bottle of wine saved for a special occasion. The roast beef in the oven exudes an aroma that fills the entire house, all wasted. In that moment, I feel something inside me break. Not my heart. It was already broken when Winifred died. No, it's something else. Hope, patience, or maybe the last thread tying me to the illusion of family. I take the roast beef out of the oven, slice it, and eat it alone. The meat is perfectly cooked, but it feels flavorless. After dinner, I clear the table, wash the dishes, and pour the wine down the sink. Why save for a special occasion that will never come? I spend the evening in the library going through old photo albums. Here's Winifred and me on our wedding day, young, laughing. Here's little Knox taking his first steps. Here's the three of us on a picnic by the river. Winifred in a straw hat, Knox with a butterfly net, me with a book on my lap. Strange how the past seems more real than the present. I've tried to build a relationship with Knox since Winifred's death. Invited him to dinners, offered to go fishing together like the old days, but he always politely declined. Then I tried to find a common language with Inoka. I gave her books, took an interest in her work, but she remained as impregnable as a silicon rock. My last attempt was 6 months ago. I suggested that Knox and Inoka move in with me. The house was big enough for all of them. I even said I could rewrite the will, deed the house to them during my lifetime. Knox seemed interested, but Inoka politely declined the offer. We appreciate your concern, Mr. Blackwood, but we're comfortable in our apartment. It's closer to work. I knew the real reason. Inoka didn't want to live with a relic of the past, as she'd once called me in a phone conversation with someone, unaware that I'd accidentally picked up the parallel tube in the library. Since then, I've stopped trying, accepted my role, an old man living in the past in a house full of ghosts. I've almost accepted the loneliness. Almost. In recent months, I've been thinking more and more about Winifred, about what she would say seeing what our family has become. She was always an optimist, believing that any relationship could be fixed if there was a will. But what if there's only desire on one side? What if the other side is just waiting for you to walk off the stage? Sometimes I think Knox and Inoka are just waiting for me to die. The house, the bank accounts, the collection of rare minerals I've collected all my life. It's all going to go to them. The thought doesn't make me angry, just tired. Tiredness and frustration. I close the photo album and return it to the shelf. It's already dark outside the window. The rain has intensified. I listen to the drops drumming on the roof and think about how many more evenings like this I'll have to spend alone. Before I go to bed, I call my old friend Phineas Graham. We met at university, worked together in exploration. Now he lives in the small coastal town of Saltcombe in the south of England. Every year he invites me to move in with him. It's sunny here, Cormac. Sea, clean air. You'd love it. Talking to Phineas is the only bright spot in the day. He talks about his new hobby, seashells, about fishing with local fishermen, about the geology book he's writing. His life is full of small joys and discoveries despite his age. After the conversation, I lie awake for a long time, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. My thoughts revolve around one thing. What if I do move in with Phineas? What if I leave this house full of memories and start a new life? But then I think about Knox. What if he comes to his senses? What if he realizes that family is more than profit and inheritance? No matter what, he's my son, my blood. And somewhere deep inside me, there's still hope that we can rebuild what was lost. With that thought, I finally fall asleep, lulled to sleep by the sound of the rain and memories of a time when this house was filled with laughter, not silence. The illness came unexpectedly, like an uninvited guest. At first it was just a cough, dry, intrusive. I put it down to the damp Lancaster fall. Then weakness set in. I began to tire quickly, climbing stairs, panting as if I'd run a mile. Then one morning I woke up feeling as if my lungs were filled with lead. The thermometer read 38 and 5. I popped an antipyretic and decided I could handle it on my own. After all, it wasn't the first cold of my life. At 77, you have to be prepared for this kind of trouble. But by evening, the temperature had risen to 39, and my breathing was hoarse and painful. I went to bed, covered myself with 2 blankets, but I was still shaking with chills. In the morning, it became clear that it was not just a cold. Every breath I took hurt in my chest, and when I coughed, there were streaks of blood on my handkerchief, reddish like rust on old iron. I knew the sign: pneumonia. Winifred had it the year before she was diagnosed with cancer. We'd called an ambulance then, and she'd spent a week in the hospital on IVs. I looked at my phone. I didn't want to call an ambulance. Hospitals had always disgusted me, especially after Winifred's illness and death. All those sterile corridors, the smell of disinfection, the faceless rooms. No, not this. I dialed Knox's number. He didn't answer right away, and when he did, I heard background noise voices. Music. Knox. Dad? Is something wrong? I could hear the irritation in his voice. I knew he didn't like it when I called in the middle of the week. Knox. My voice sounded weaker than I expected. I think I have pneumonia. Yeah, I need help. There was a pause. I heard Knox cover the phone with his hand and say something to someone, then return to the conversation. Are you sure? Have you been to a doctor? No, but the symptoms... I coughed, and that was a better answer than any words. You need to go to the hospital, Dad. Call an ambulance. I don't want to go to the hospital. Stubbornness has always been my weakness. I just need someone to... I coughed again, to bring medicine, maybe help with the cooking. For a few days. Another pause, longer. Father, this isn't a good time. Inoka has a big event this Saturday, a party for the new editor-in-chief of the publishing house. We've been preparing for a week. Her promotion could depend on it. I closed my eyes. Of course, Inoki's party. What else could be more important than his father's illness? It was silly to hope for any other answer. I understand, I said quietly. Look, I can stop by your place for an hour on Friday before work. I'll bring whatever medication you want. Friday, 3 days from now. I suppressed a bitter chuckle. Thank you, son, I said. Don't worry, I'll be fine. We exchanged a few more words and I hung up. Outside the window it was raining, gray and bleak like my thoughts. I struggled to get out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. I needed something hot to drink. The water in the kettle was boiling, but I couldn't stand. My legs were shaking. I sank into a chair, in my pajamas and robe, and sat there until the kettle went off. My head was buzzing, dark spots floating in front of my eyes. So this is how it happens, I thought with sudden calm. This is how old people die alone. I don't know how long I sat like that, but I was roused from my stupor by a knock at the door. At first I thought I heard it, but it came again, more insistently. With difficulty, I got to the door and opened it. On the threshold stood Mrs. Pemberton, my neighbor. She was holding a paper bag. "Mr. Blackwood," she exclaimed when she saw me. "Oh my God, you look awful." I tried to smile, but it seemed to make it worse. "Just a little cold," I wheezed. "Not a cold at all." Mrs. Pemberton was already pushing past me into the house. "You're feverish, and you can hardly stand on your feet. You must go to bed at once." It was useless to argue with Mrs. Pemberton. In her 69 years, she retained the energy and vigor of her youth, and her former profession as a nurse had added to her confidence in medical matters. "I brought you a pie," she said, already in command in my kitchen. "But I see you want something else. Have you been ill for a long time? Have you called a doctor? Have you taken antibiotics?" The questions came one after another as she poured water into the kettle and set out the cups. "Last night," I answered. "No, and no. Cormac Blackwood, you are an impossible man." She shook her hands. "Pneumonia is no joke at your age." "How do you know it's pneumonia?" I was surprised. 35 years in the intensive care unit, dear. I recognized pneumonia from the doorstep. She shoved a cup of hot tea into my hand. "Drink it. I'll be right back." And she went out, leaving me in the kitchen. I drank the tea obediently, Feeling the hot liquid ease the pain in my chest a little. Mrs. Pemberton returned 20 minutes later with a small bag. I had some medicine left over from the last bronchitis. The antibiotics are expired, so you can't take them. But the antipyretics and cough medicine will come in handy. She put the packets on the table. It'll keep you going, but you need a doctor. I can call Dylan. He does home visits. Dr. Dylan Moore was a local doctor who treated my father. Don't worry, I began, but another coughing fit interrupted my objections. Okay, that's it, Mrs. Pemberton said firmly. I'm calling Dylan right now, and you go to bed. There was no point in arguing with her. I let myself be carried upstairs and put to bed like a child. Then I fell into a heavy, feverish sleep. The next few days became one endless nightmare. Dr. Dylan came in, examined me, and confirmed the diagnosis: bilateral pneumonia. He prescribed antibiotics and insisted on hospitalization, but I stubbornly refused. Eventually he gave up, but made Mrs. Pemberton promise that she would keep an eye on me and call an ambulance if things got worse. And she did. She came 3 times a day: morning, lunchtime, and evening. She brought food, gave me medicine, changed my bedclothes when they were soaked with sweat. She told me I was a stubborn old donkey, but there was a care in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. One day, I think it was Friday, but I wasn't good with time anymore. Knox came in. He looked annoyed and impatient, glancing at his watch. He put a bag of meds on the nightstand, stood by the bed for a few minutes, asking how I was feeling without looking me in the eye. Then he said he had to go. Inoka was having a party, and he needed help getting ready. Sure, son, I said. Thanks for stopping by. Dad, he hesitated in the doorway. Maybe we should go to the hospital after all. I could. No, I said firmly. There's nothing wrong with me. I have Mrs. Pemberton. He nodded, clearly relieved. I heard the front door open and close downstairs, and then the sound of a car pulling away. My son had returned to his real life, leaving me with my illness and my thoughts. And the thoughts were not fun. Lying in bed, looking up at the ceiling, I thought about my life, about my career as a geologist, about my love of rocks and minerals, about how I found beauty in what others thought was just a pile of earth, about Winifred, about our first meeting in the university library, about 38 years together, about how she'd gone, quietly in her sleep, leaving me alone in this big house, and about Knox, about the little boy with the unruly hair and inquisitive eyes who turned into a cold, calculating man. What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? Or is it just life, each generation drifting away from the previous one, each son inevitably betraying his father? I thought also of home, about the old Blackwood house that had passed from father to son for 4 generations. I was born in this house, and Knox was born here, a house full of memories, stories, secrets. Every creaking floorboard, every crack in the ceiling was familiar and dear to me. Inoka once told me that after I died, she and Knox would probably sell the house. It's too old, too big for the 2 of us, and so far from London. She'd said it casually over tea, unaware of the pain her words were causing me. Knox was silent then, not standing up to defend the family nest. On the 5th day of my illness, I felt myself getting better. My fever had gone down, my cough was less painful. I was able to get out of bed, and even to go downstairs where I was met by a cheerful Mrs. Pemberton. "You look almost human, Mr. Blackwood," she exclaimed as she helped me to the kitchen table. "I've made chicken broth. It's good for a convalescent." I gratefully accepted the plate of steaming broth. I felt appetite for the first time in days. "How can I thank you, Eleanor?" I asked, using her name, which I rarely did. "Get well, that's all," she smiled. "Neighbors should help each other. You'd do the same for me." I would, I agreed, though I wasn't sure it was true. The last few years I'd gotten so caught up in my loneliness that I'd almost stopped noticing other people. While I ate, Mrs. Pemberton told me the local news. The Jenkinses had a granddaughter, Pastor Lloyd had slipped on the ice and broken his arm, and the old Ridley mansion was finally being renovated. Ordinary, simple stories, but they brought me back to life, to a reality beyond my illness and my bitter thoughts. "And your son never came again?" she asked me casually as she gathered up the dishes. "No," I answered. He has a lot to do. A lot to do, she repeated with a note of disapproval. What could be more important than a sick father? I didn't answer. What could I say? What was more important to my son than his wife's party? That he only came once, for 15 minutes, and that reluctantly? That he might be waiting for me to die so he could sell the house and forget all about me? Young people are different now, said Mrs. Pemberton, as if she had read my thoughts. They live fast and think only of themselves. My Richard doesn't call much either. He lives in Australia and says he's busy. But I know he's just forgetting about his old mother. She sounded the same pain that gnawed at me, the pain of a rejected parent. They're not bad, I said, not believing what I was saying. They're just different. They have their own lives. A life, Mrs. Pemberton snorted. You know what I'll tell you, Cormac Blackwood. Life's too short to waste it waiting for your son to call, for him to remember, for him to come. You have to live for yourself while you still have the strength. I looked at her in surprise. Mrs. Pemberton had always seemed to me a model of maternal dedication, and to say such a thing all of a sudden. What do you mean, Arden? I asked. That's what I mean, she shrugged her shoulders. After George died, I sat at home for 2 years, waiting for Richard to call, crying at night. And then I decided enough was enough. I signed up for gardening classes, then yoga. I started going on excursions with my friends. I went to Paris last spring. She smiled and her face suddenly looked younger. Life doesn't end when children fly away from the nest, or when a loved one leaves. It just changes. I was silent, pondering her words. She was right. I'd spent the last 5 years living a ghost, clinging to the past, to the memories of Winifred, to the hope that Knox would return, if not in body, at least in soul, to her home. But what if I should not cling to the past, but create a new present? You're right, Eleanor, I said at last. You're absolutely right. She smiled satisfied and went on cleaning the kitchen, while I sat there absorbed in my thoughts. Something was brewing inside me, a new feeling, a new idea. What if I really started living for myself? What if I stopped expecting Knox to change, to remember his duty to me? That night after Mrs. Pemberton left, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I thought of her words, of Phineas and his invitation, of the house by the sea where it was sunny and smelled of salt. I thought about how maybe I should let go of the past, not just Winifred, but Knox in this old house full of memories. I thought about my son's betrayal, about his indifference to my illness, about how easily he'd chosen his wife's party over helping his father. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not bitterness, not pain, but determination. Determination to change my life before it was too late. With that thought, I finally fell asleep, and I dreamed of Winifred. She was standing on the beach in a white dress, and the wind was playing with her hair. She was smiling and beckoning me with her hand. Go, Cormac. It was as if she were saying, go and live. Recovery was slower than I'd hoped. The pneumonia receded reluctantly, leaving behind weakness and shortness of breath. But with each passing day, I could feel my strength and determination returning. I made the call to Knox when I was back on my feet. It was Tuesday morning, and I knew he was usually still home at that time. Dad? He sounded surprised. How are you feeling? Better, I answered. The doctor says I'm on the mend. That's good. There was a pause. I'm sorry I haven't been here more. You know how busy Inoki is at work these days. Of course, son. I tried to keep my voice as nonchalant as possible. I understand. By the way, I was wondering, you have a vacation coming up, right? Were you planning on going somewhere? Yes, he sounded excited. We're going to Italy for a week. Inoka got an award for a successful event, and we decided to spend it on traveling. Florence, Rome, Venice. Sounds wonderful, I said. When are you leaving? Next Monday. We'll be back in a week, Sunday night. That's fine. Bring me a postcard from Venice, will you? Winifred had always wanted to go there. Of course, Father, he answered with a note of surprise. I didn't usually ask for such small things. After the conversation, I sat down at the table and wrote a list of things to do. Knox and Inoka would be gone for exactly a week. That should be enough. The first thing I did was call the real estate agency, Barrows & Sons. Ivor Burrows was an old acquaintance of mine from when we were both young and ambitious. Things were mostly handled by his son Miles now, but Ivor made an exception for me. "Cormac, you old fox," he exclaimed when I explained the situation. "Are you sure? The House of Blackwood. It's a story." "A story that has come to an end," I replied. "How much do you think it's worth?" The amount Ivor said made me whistle. It turned out that in recent years, real estate in our neighborhood has risen in price. An old house with history, in good condition, with a large lot is a treasure trove for buyers looking for something special. "I can list it at that price," Ivor said. "But keep in mind that a quick sale will require a discount. If you need the money urgently—" "I don't need urgency. I need confidentiality," I interrupted. "And yes, I'm willing to lower the price for a quick sale. But there's one condition. Everything must be finalized within a week before Knox returns." "It's not an easy task," Ivor said thoughtfully, "but it's doable. I have a couple of clients who have been interested in houses in your neighborhood for a long time. I can get in touch with them today." "Do that, Ivor. And one more thing." I hesitated. "I want the deed to include the right of lifetime residency for Knox and his wife. They can live in the house until one of them dies or decides to move out voluntarily, but they can't sell it." Ivor whistled. "That's a clever idea, Cormac. It'll bring the price down 20%, but it'll make sure your son doesn't end up on the street." "Exactly," I nodded. "I'm not a monster, Ivor. I just want to teach you a lesson." After I talked to Ivor, I began the second part of my plan. The property. 50 years of living in this house had accumulated a lot of things. Furniture, books, dishes, paintings, my geologic collections. I decided to take some of it with me, the most valuable and dear to my heart. Something to give to charity. The rest I'd leave to the new owners, or Knox if he wanted it. I started in the attic. The dusty space under the roof held evidence of decades past. Knox's old toys, boxes of Christmas decorations, suitcases of clothes Winifred and I hadn't worn in years. I spent an entire day there, sorting, deciding the fate of each item. A lot of it went into garbage bags, but some items left me with a beating heart. The first pair of Knox's shoes, the crocheted scarf Winifred had given me for our first anniversary, the old theodolite I'd started my career as a geologist with. By evening, I was exhausted physically and emotionally, but the attic was dismantled. I went down to my room and opened the safe hidden behind a painting. The most valuable items were stored there. House deeds, insurance policies, some cash, Winifred's jewelry, and a small box of rare minerals I'd collected all my life. I pulled everything out, spreading it out on the bed. Winifred's jewelry should rightfully belong to Knox for his future daughter, if he ever has one. The deed to the house would soon be invalid. The mineral collection, on the other hand, will come with me. The next day, Ivor arrived with the prospective buyers, a middle-aged married couple, Colin and Deirdre Fisher. He is a successful heart surgeon, she a professor of literature. 2 grown children, already living on their own. These were the kind of people Ivor thought could appreciate an old house with history. I gave them a tour, told them about the house, how my great-grandfather had built it in 1899, how each generation of Blackwoods had added something different, showed the secret door in the library that led to the little room where my grandfather hid valuables during the war, explained why the floorboards on the second floor creaked that way and not the other way around. Deirdre looked at me with understanding and sympathy. I think she guessed what was driving the old man to sell the family home in such a hurry. Colin was more practical. He asked about the condition of the roof, the pipes, the foundation. I answered honestly, "The house is old but strong. I will warn about all its quirks." After they left, Ivor stayed. "They're interested," he said, "especially Deirdre. She fell in love with the library at first sight." "Good," I nodded. "They seem like decent people. But the lifetime residency clause for your son—" Ivor shook his head. "They want to discuss it further. They're afraid it will cause problems." "Tell them that my son will not exercise that right," I replied. "It's just insurance." Ivor gave me a long look, but didn't ask any further. Over the next few days, I continued to sort through the property while meeting with a lawyer and drawing up the paperwork to sell the house. The Fishers agreed to my terms, albeit at a discount. The money was to be deposited in my account on the day I signed the contract, Friday, 2 days before Knox returned. I decided not to tell Mrs. Pemberton of my plans until the last minute. She would have tried to talk me out of it, and I didn't have the energy for arguments. But on Friday, after the papers were signed, I invited her to tea. "You're looking better, Mr. Blackwood," she said, sitting down at the table. "Your complexion is almost healthy now." "I feel better than ever, Eleanor," I replied, "and it is not only health." She looked at me curiously, and I told her everything. About the decision to sell the house, about the plans to go to Phineas, about the note I was going to leave for Knox. She listened without interrupting, only occasionally shaking her head. "Are you sure, Cormac?" she asked when I was done. "It's a drastic step." "As sure as I've ever been," I replied. "You know, pneumonia made me realize one simple thing. Life is too short to waste it waiting for a love that isn't going to happen. Knox made his choice, and I'm making mine." Mrs. Pemberton was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I'll miss you," she said simply. "You've been a good neighbor." "And you, Eleanor," I smiled. "Without you, I wouldn't have gotten over my pneumonia." Thank you for that conversation. It changed a lot of things." "I'm glad I helped," she smiled back. "When are you leaving?" "Sunday morning. The Fishers will move in a month after the renovations. Until then, the house will be empty, unless—" I didn't finish. "Unless your son exercises his right," she finished for me. "That's what you're hoping for, isn't it?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe part of me still hopes he'll understand. But the other part just wants to start a new life." Saturday passed in final preparations. I packed the things I had decided to take with me: some clothes, books, photo albums, my mineral collection. Everything fit into 2 suitcases and a few boxes. How little, it turns out, a person really needs. I kept most of the furniture and household goods. They now belong to the Fishers, according to the contract. I put Winifred's jewelry, family photos, and a few memorabilia in a separate box for Knox, placing it in a prominent spot in the living room. In the evening, I sat down to write a note. It took me a long time to choose the words, starting over several times. I didn't want it to sound accusatory or bitter. Just honest. "Dear Knox, by the time you read this note, I will no longer be in Lancaster. I've sold the house to the Fisher family. I think you'll approve. They're decent people. The deed gives you the right to live here for life if you wish to exercise it. My decision may seem sudden, but it's actually been a long time coming. The illness was just the last straw. When you're lying in a fever, unable to get out of bed, a lot of things become clearer. I realized that for years I had been waiting for you to remember that I was your father, that you would find a place for me in your life. But as time goes on, nothing changes. I don't blame you or Anoka. You have your own lives, your own priorities. A party is more important than a sick father. That's your choice, and I accept it. But you also accept my choice to live your remaining years for yourself, not waiting for a call or a visit that probably won't come. I left your mother's jewelry and a few family heirlooms for you in a box in the living room. The rest you can take or leave to your new owners. It's up to you. Don't try to find me. Someday maybe I'll contact you myself. Or maybe not. Your father, Cormac Blackwood." I reread the note several times. It seemed right. Not too hard, not too soft. Just right. I sealed it in an envelope and pinned it to the front door, where Knox would be sure to see it. Sunday morning, Phineas picked me up in his old Volvo. I walked around the empty house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every memory. The bedroom was where I stayed the longest, where Winifred and I had spent so many nights, where she had passed away, where I lay with pneumonia, making the most important decision of my life. "Goodbye," I whispered, closing the door. "Goodbye, old house." I walked out onto the porch where Phineas was waiting for me, his wrinkled face lit up with a smile. "Ready for a new life, old boy?" he asked, helping me with my suitcases. "More than ready," I said, getting into the car. "Let's go." We were off. I didn't look back at the house. I looked only ahead, at the road leading to a new life. A few hours later that evening, a cab pulled up to the house. Knox and Inoka got out of it, tanned and rested after a week in Italy. Knox pulled out his keys, unlocked the door, and they stepped inside, not noticing the note pinned outside. "Dad," Knox called out, turning on the light in the hallway. "We're back. Brought you some souvenirs from Venice." Silence was his answer. They went into the living room, and Anoka was the first to notice the change. "Knox," she said in a strained voice, "where's all the furniture?" Knox looked around. The living room was almost empty. Just an old couch, a coffee table, and a box standing on it. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Dad, are you home?" They walked around the house, turning on the lights in every room. It was the same pattern everywhere. Minimal furniture, empty walls where paintings and photographs used to hang. It was as if the house was being prepared for sale or already sold. "What's going on, Knox?" Inoki sounded scared. "Where's your father? Where's all the stuff?" Knox didn't answer. He went back into the living room and opened the box. Inside were his mother's jewelry, a few photo albums, some papers. On top was a small note. "This is your inheritance, Knox. The rest I took with me or left to the new owners of the house." "The new owners?" Anoka asked, reading over his shoulder. "Had he sold the house?" "He couldn't have. It's your inheritance." Knox didn't answer anything. Pale, he went out into the hallway and then noticed an envelope pinned to the door from the inside. He tore it off, opened it, and began to read. Inoka came up to him. "What is it? What is he writing?" Knox silently held out the note to her. She ran her eyes over the lines and her face changed. First bewilderment, then shock, then anger. "He couldn't have done it," she exclaimed. "Sell the house? Go away to some unknown place? All because we didn't babysit him when he had a cold?" "Pneumonia," Knox corrected her quietly. "He had pneumonia, not a cold." Inoka paid no attention to his words. "We have to find him. Make him cancel the deal. I mean, this is fraud. He's an old man, probably out of his mind after his illness. Any court of law—" "Shut up," Knox said suddenly. His voice was quiet, but there was such power in it that Anoka stopped short. "Just shut up." He reread the note again. "The party is more important than a sick father. That's your choice, and I accept it." Those words burned him like red-hot iron, because they were true. "He had the right to sell the house," Knox said after a long pause. "He owned it, and by the looks of it, he's taken care of us. You see what it says here about the right to live here for life? Lifetime occupancy?" Anoka snorted. "In this ruin? You're kidding. Who needs it, but you're out of his mind, father." Knox looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "This is my childhood home, Anoka. The house where I grew up, where my father and my grandfather grew up." "So?" She shrugged. "Old, uncomfortable, in constant need of repair. We were going to sell it anyway when—" She paused. "When Dad died?" Knox finished for her. "Yeah, you've said that many times. Apparently, so did he." Inoka looked away, her shoulders tense. "I don't understand why you're defending him. He disinherited you. He disinherited us." "No," Knox shook his head. "He disinherited us. But the real inheritance is right here." He pointed to a box. Photographs, jewelry, memories, things that really had value to him. They stood in an empty hallway, in a house that had still belonged to the Blackwood family in the morning, and was now a stranger. Inoka looked confused and angry. Knox looked shocked and strangely devastated. "What are we going to do?" Inoka finally asked. Knox reread his father's note once more. "Don't try to find me. Someday, perhaps I will contact you myself. Or maybe not. I don't know," he answered honestly. I don't know." Saltcombe greeted me with the sound of the surf and the cries of seagulls. The small town on the south coast of England was nothing like stiff, rainy Lancaster. Even the air was different here, fresh, salty, soaked with iodine and freedom. Phineas rented a small cottage on the outskirts of the town, a 5-minute walk from the sea. A 2-story cottage with blue shutters and a small garden, surrounded by similarly cozy houses. Nothing like the massive Blackwood mansion. "Welcome to my bachelor pad," Phineas announced as he helped me bring my things in. "The second floor is all yours. There's a bedroom, an office, and a bathroom. It's a little cramped compared to what you're used to, but the view is great." He was right. The view from the bedroom window was of the sea, vast, merging with the sky on the horizon. I stood there mesmerized by the sight and felt something inside me relax, loosening the knot I'd been carrying in my chest for the last few years. "Do you like it?" Phineas asked, standing in the doorway. "More than I expected," I answered honestly. The first few days at Saltcombe passed in a pleasant bustle. I was unpacking, setting up my room, familiarizing myself with the town. Phineas was the perfect guide. He had lived here for 10 years and knew every corner. We walked along the waterfront, drank tea in a small pastry shop overlooking the harbor, wandered through the fish market, where Phineas haggled with the fishermen like a local. He introduced me to his friends, similarly retired older gentlemen who had moved here from the big cities. They met 3 times a week at the local pub, the Seahorse, to play chess and discuss the news. "You'll get used to it," Phineas said the first Saturday. We sat on a bench on the waterfront, watching the fishing boats. "The people here are nice. No one asks too many questions." I nodded, grateful for that understanding. Phineas didn't question me about the reasons for my sudden move. He didn't ask questions about Knox or the house. He accepted me for who I was, a 77-year-old man starting over. In the evenings, we sat in the small living room, sipped whiskey, and talked about the past. Our college years, our first geological expeditions, the women we loved. Phineas had been widowed the year before me, and his wife Emily had also died of cancer. This shared pain brought us even closer together. "You know, Cormac," he said one evening, "it took me a long time to forgive myself for not seeing the first symptoms. Maybe if we'd gone to the doctor sooner?" "Come on," I shook my head. "You couldn't have known. Neither could I. Cancer is an insidious disease." Phineas nodded and refilled our glasses with whiskey. "And your son? Does he know where you are?" I shook my head. "No, and let him stay that way, at least for now." Phineas didn't broach the subject, and I was grateful for that. Gradually, I fell into the measured rhythm of Saltcombe life. In the morning, a jog along the beach. Phineas insisted that, at our age, movement was life. Then breakfast on the terrace, weather permitting. In the afternoon, walks, reading, sometimes trips to neighboring towns. In the evening, a pub or quiet conversations at home. 2 weeks after my arrival, Phineas introduced me to Beatrice Lanchbury, the owner of the local library. A tall, stately woman with short gray hair and lively brown eyes, she made an immediate impression on me. "Mr. Blackwood, at last!" she exclaimed, shaking my hand. "Phineas has told me so much about you. I hear you're a geologist? We're just starting a science department, and we're short of a counselor. So I volunteered at the Saltcombe Library. 3 days a week, I help Beatrice catalog books on geology, paleontology, and mineralogy. The work was not difficult but enjoyable. I felt useful again, sharing my knowledge again. Beatrice proved to be an interesting conversationalist. A sailor's widow, she traveled a lot in her youth, saw different countries, studied different cultures. We often stayed after the library closed, discussing books, traveling, life. "You don't look like someone who has lived in Saltcombe all her life," I said to her one day. She smiled and her eyes sparkled. "I haven't lived here all my life. I moved here 5 years ago, after my husband died. Our house in London had gotten too big and empty for one." I nodded, understanding her as well as anyone. "And how do you like it here? Don't you miss the big city?" "Sometimes," she shrugged. "But here, calmer, cleaner. People are kinder." "And then," she smiled, "at our age, it's not so important where we live anymore. It's how we live." Those words struck a chord with me. At our age. For the first time, I didn't feel annoyed at being reminded of my age. Maybe because Beatrice did not speak of it with pity or condescension, but as a simple fact to accept and move on. The days passed each other, adding up to weeks. I hadn't kept track of the calendar, hadn't counted the days since I'd left Lancaster. But sometimes, usually at night, my thoughts brought me back to the old house. I thought about Knox, about his reaction to my departure. Is he angry? Was he looking for me? Or did he just wave goodbye and move on with his life? I didn't regret my decision. Every morning, waking up to the sound of seagulls and the sound of the surf, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Here in Saltcombe, I wasn't old man Blackwood, Knox's father, the former owner of the mansion. I was just Cormac, a new resident, a library volunteer, a friend of Phineas. One day, about a month after I arrived, Phineas returned from town with an unaccustomedly serious face. "My nephew called from Lancaster," he said, sitting down in the chair across from me. "He said a man was asking about you, showed me your picture, wondered if anyone knew where you'd gone." I felt my heart twitch. "Knox," I said quietly. "That's my son." Phineas nodded. "That's what I thought." What are we going to do? I wondered. Part of me wanted to see Knox, to talk to him, to explain my decision as face to face. But the other part, the bigger part, wasn't ready for that meeting yet. "It's okay," I said finally. "Does your nephew know I'm here?" "No," Phineas shook his head. "I haven't told anyone, and I won't if you don't want me to." I nodded gratefully. "Thank you, friend. For now. For now, let's just leave it at that." But the thought of Knox looking for me kept me awake. I imagined him walking around Lancaster, asking neighbors, former colleagues, acquaintances. What's driving him? Anxiety? Guilt? Or just a desire to recover a lost inheritance? I tried to imagine how Knox and Inoka would react to finding an empty house in my note. Inoka must have been furious. She'd always looked at the Blackwood house as an investment, as something she would one day own. And Knox? How did he feel when he read my words that the party was more important to him than his sick father? That night I dreamed of the old house. I walked through empty rooms, and each one held echoes of the past. Winifred's laughter, little Knox's baby cries, the sound of my footsteps on the creaky floorboards. In the dream, I was looking for something, but I couldn't find it. When I woke up, there were tears on my pillow. At breakfast, Phineas noticed my reddened eyes but said nothing. Instead, he suggested we go to the neighboring town of Torquay, where there was a mineral exhibition. "It would be fun," he said. And then, I'm told, there are some amazing examples of amethyst from South America. "You like amethyst, don't you?" I smiled gratefully. Phineas knew how to distract me from my sad thoughts. The exhibition was really interesting. Wandering among the crystal showcases, I temporarily forgot about my worries. Here, among the stones, I felt in my element. I even allowed myself to enter into a discussion with one of the curators of the exhibition about the origin of one rare mineral. "You know a lot about geology," said the curator, a young man in his 30s. "I should be," I smiled. "I worked as a geologist for 40 years. "Really?" His eyes lit up. "We're looking for a consultant for our museum. Perhaps you'd be interested?" And so my new life took on another job, consulting at the Torquay Natural History Museum. Once a week I would take the bus there, spend a few hours helping to catalog the mineral collection, and return in the evening, tired but satisfied. Life at Saltcombe was gradually taking shape, becoming familiar and comfortable. I was making new acquaintances, finding new activities, discovering new places. On Wednesday evenings, Phineas and his friends and I played chess at the Seahorse. On Fridays, I helped out at Beatrice's library. On Sundays, Phineas and I cooked a big dinner and invited the neighbors over. Still, thoughts of Knox never left me. Every time I saw a young man with dark hair on the street, I shuddered, thinking it was him. Every time the phone rang, my heart skipped a beat. One day I asked Phineas, "If your nephew met Knox again, what would you want him to say to him?" Phineas gave me a long look. "What would you want him to say?" I wondered. "That I'm alive, healthy, and that I don't hold a grudge against him." Phineas nodded. "I'll pass it on." Another 2 weeks went by. One morning, checking the mail, not much of it in my name, mostly bills and handbills, I found a letter with a Lancaster postmark. The sender was Mrs. E. Pemberton. My heart beat more frequently. I carried the letter to my room, sat on my bed, and carefully opened the envelope. "Dear Mr. Blackwood, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I hesitated a long time before writing, but I feel it is my duty to inform you that your son came to see me several times asking about you. He seemed very anxious and remorseful. He said he wanted to apologize to you personally. I didn't tell him where you were, as I don't know exactly, though I guessed you were at Mr. Graham's in Saltcombe. I only said that you were alive and well, and that I trust that in time you will contact him yourself. I also want to let you know that all is well with the new owners of your house. They have started repairing the roof and are repainting the facade. I think you would be pleased to know that the house is being taken care of. Best wishes, Eleanor Pemberton. There was another note in the envelope, written in a different handwriting. Father, I don't know if you will read this, and I realize I have no right to ask to see you. But if there is even the slightest chance, I'd like to talk to you. Not about the house or the money, just talk. I've realized a lot of things these past weeks. If you're ready, give me a call. My number hasn't changed. Knox. I reread the note several times. I could sense genuine remorse in the short lines. But was I ready to see my son? To forgive him? To start over? I didn't know. That evening I showed the letters to Phineas. He read them silently, then looked at me. What do you want to do? I don't know, I answered honestly. Part of me wants to see him, to talk to him, hear his explanations. But the other part is afraid of being disappointed again. I understand, Phineas nodded. But maybe you should give him a chance. After all, he is your son. What about Inoka? I asked. I don't see any letters of apology from her. Phineas grinned. I don't think she's the kind of woman who admits her mistakes. But Knox, from the letter, he does seem to be sorry. Besides, you don't have to forgive and forget. You can just listen. I've been thinking. Phineas was right. I could just listen to Knox without making any decisions right away. To see him, to see if his remorse was genuine or just an attempt to regain his lost inheritance. I'll think about it, I said. That night I dreamed of the old house again. But this time it wasn't empty. It was occupied by new people, the Fishers, with their children and grandchildren. I stood outside looking at the glowing windows and felt not bitterness, but a strange satisfaction. The house continued to live, even if I was no longer in it. In the morning, I woke up with a clear head. I knew what I had to do. First, I wrote back to Mrs. Pemberton, thanking her for the letter and asking her to tell Knox that I had received his note and was considering his offer. Then I called the Torquay Museum and canceled my consultation for the following week. Going away? Phineas asked, noticing my preparations. Not for long, I answered. I want to go to Lancaster, to see the house, to talk. Her quiet wisdom and warm concern had helped me in my moments of doubt. I know, I answered, and it gives me strength to face the past. Saltcombe met me in the early morning, shrouded in a misty haze. I stood on the veranda of Phineas's cottage, breathing in the salty sea air and enjoying the silence, which was broken only by the cries of seagulls and the distant sound of the surf. The trip to Lancaster was left behind like a strange, disturbing dream. 3 days that turned my perception of the past and possibly the future upside down. I hadn't called Knox beforehand. I wanted to see the house, my former home, with my own eyes first, to see how it had changed under the new owners. The Fishers had indeed begun renovations. The roof was partially re-roofed. The facade was painted light gray instead of the previous dark brown. There were new flower beds in the garden. It was as if the house had become younger, as if it had shed the weight of the past. I was standing on the opposite side of the street, looking at these changes, when a familiar voice called out to me, "Cormac, they're back after all." Mrs. Pemberton was hurrying across the street toward me, her face glowing with genuine joy. She hugged me and I found myself suddenly glad to see her. "Not for long, Eleanor," I said. "I just wanted to see the house and to settle some things." She nodded understandingly. "Would you like to come in for tea?" I'd just baked a blueberry pie. Over tea in her cozy kitchen, to the ticking of the antique clock, I finally asked the question that had been bugging me. "Does Knox come here often?" Mrs. Pemberton stirred her spoon in her cup. "Almost every day at first. Asked around the neighborhood, showed me your picture. He wasn't himself. Then, less. But he still comes by once a week. Asked me if I've heard from you." "And his wife?" I tried to make my voice sound indifferent. "Enoch," Mrs. Pemberton snorted. "I haven't seen her here since you left. They say she was furious when she found out the house was sold. Wanted to sue, but your son talked her out of it." I nodded. It sounded plausible. "How's he doing?" "Knox?" Mrs. Pemberton looked at me carefully. "Changed, slimmed down. He looks tired. Recently said he and Inoka were taking a break from their relationship. He's renting an apartment downtown." That news took me by surprise. Knox and Inoka broke up? Was my departure the catalyst for a deeper change? "Would you call him?" Mrs. Pemberton asked. He really wants to see you, Cormac. I promised I'd think about it. And the next morning, waking up in my hotel room, I realized I was ready for this meeting. I dialed Knox's number, which had remained the same for years. He answered after the first beep, as if he'd been sitting by the phone waiting for a call. I'm listening. Knox, I said. It's me. Cormac. A pause, then his voice trembling with excitement. Father, are you? You're in Lancaster. Yes, I arrived yesterday. I'm at the Crown and Anchor. Can I come? Now? I took a deep breath. Yes, I'll be waiting in the hotel restaurant. He arrived 20 minutes later. I sat at the window, watching the street, and saw him park, get out of the car in a hurry, stand for a second in front of the entrance, gathering his wits. He looked exactly as Mrs. Pemberton had described him, thin, with shadows under his eyes and a wrinkled suit that seemed to be too big for him. As he entered the restaurant, our eyes met, and I saw something in his gaze that I hadn't seen in years. Recognition. Not just the physical recognition of a son seeing his father, but a deeper recognition of a soul seeing a soulmate. Father, he said as he approached the table. You? Sit down, Knox. I pointed to the chair across from him. He sat down, keeping his eyes on me, as if he was afraid I'd disappear if he blinked. I didn't know you were coming, he said. Mrs. Pemberton didn't say. She didn't know. I decided spontaneously. An awkward pause hung between us. There was so much to say, but neither of us knew where to begin. How are you? Knox finally asked. Are you all right? I'm fine, I nodded. The pneumonia's gone without a trace. I hear you're living in Saltcombe. With a friend of yours? Yes, and, do you like it there? Very much. Our conversation was like a careful probing of the ground, as if we were afraid of making the wrong move and upsetting the delicate balance. I heard you and Inoka split up, I said, deciding not to beat around the bush. Knox lowered his gaze. Yeah, a lot has changed since you left. I've been rethinking things. And what conclusions have you come to? He looked up, and I could see the pain and determination in his eyes. That I was selfish. That I let Inoka come between us. That I had betrayed you, Father. I remained silent, giving him a chance to speak. When you got sick, he continued, and called me, I knew I had to come. But Inoka was throwing this party, and her promotion depended on it, and she said, he stammered, no, it's not her fault. It was my choice. I decided that the party was more important, that you could handle it on your own, that it was just a cold. Pneumonia, I corrected quietly. Bilateral. Yeah, he swallowed. I found out later from Mrs. Pemberton. She helped you a lot, didn't she? Yeah, I couldn't have done it without her. Knox nodded, his face contorted with pain. And your son, I didn't even come to see you. Only once. For 15 minutes. And all I could think about was getting away. He was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When we came back from Italy and saw the house empty, I didn't realize what had happened. I thought maybe you'd been robbed or... He grinned bitterly. He chuckled bitterly. Then I read your note, and it all made sense. How did Inoka react? I asked. How do you think? There was bitterness in his voice. She was furious. Said you had no right, that we should sue, that you were out of your mind. But I knew you had every right. This is your house. It was. I nodded. His words confirmed what I already knew about Enoch. We had a big fight that night, Knox continued. It was the first time I saw her, the real her. All she talked about was the money, the lost inheritance. Not a word about you disappearing, that something might have happened to you. Just about the house and the money. And that's when I realized. He looked up at me with eyes full of pain. I realized you were always right about her. I didn't answer. What could I say? I told you so. That would be too petty. After that night, we tried to keep the relationship going, Knox continued. But something broke. I started to see things I hadn't noticed before. How she manipulated me. How everything in our lives revolved around her ambitions, her career. A month ago, I packed up and left. He fell silent, staring out the window at the rainy Lancaster street. I've been looking for you, he said quietly. Everywhere. Asked neighbors, your former colleagues. No one knew anything, or didn't want to talk. I told you not to tell, I nodded. I needed time. Space. I understand, Knox nodded. And I'm grateful you called, for giving me a chance to apologize. Knox, I looked him straight in the eye. Do you realize it's not just about that party? It was just the last straw. The years of estrangement, the years when you seemed to cut me out of your life. I know, he lowered his head. After Mom died, everything changed. Yeah, I didn't know how to be with you without her. She was always between us, in a good way, a link. And then Inoka came along. Yeah, he sighed. She was so confident, knew what she wanted. It was like I fell under her influence. She said we should build our own lives, our own family, that elderly parents were a burden. And you agreed with her. Yeah, because it was convenient, because it was a way for me to justify being away from you. I could tell myself that it's normal, that everyone does it, that I have my own life and you should understand that. He looked up, tears in his eyes. But when you left, I realized what a mistake I'd made, that I hadn't just lost a father, I'd lost a friend, a mentor, a man who was always there for me, even when I didn't appreciate it. I looked at my son, the man in whom I'd seen so long only coldness and calculation. Now I saw before me a broken, remorseful man who had finally realized his mistakes. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately, to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay. But the other part, the wiser, more cautious part, knew that real change takes time. What do you want from me, Knox? I asked you bluntly. What do you expect from our meeting? He shook his head. Nothing. I just wanted to see you, to tell you how sorry I am, to see if you were happy in your new life. I am, I answered honestly, for the first time in a long time. That's good, he smiled weakly. You deserve it, after everything that's happened. We were silent. It was drizzling outside the window, the drops dripping down the glass, blurring the outline of the street. Knox, I said finally, I can't go back. I can't go back to the way things were. I understand, he nodded. I'm not asking you to. It's just, maybe we could start over? Not like before, but differently? I stared at him, trying to see the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the boy I'd told about the stars, the boy I'd comforted after school failures. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm not ready to say yes right now. There's too much pain, too much disappointment. But I'm not saying no either. Just give me time. Knox nodded, gratitude in his eyes for even that small hope. As much time as you like, Father. I'll be waiting. Tell me about your life, I suggested to change the subject. Sonny, and what are you doing now? Are you still working at the same company? No, he shook his head. I quit. That job, it was never mine. Inoka got me into it through her father, but I always felt out of place. So what do you do now? Back to editing, he smiled slightly. Remember I always loved books? I work as a freelance editor for several publishing houses. It's not as prestigious or lucrative as financial analysis, but I feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. I nodded. Knox had always loved literature, ever since he was a kid. It was a passion he'd inherited from Winifred. She would have approved, I said quietly. Your mother. She always said you should do what you love. I know, his voice trembled. I think about her a lot, especially lately. I think she'd be disappointed in what I did to you. Winifred was never good at being angry for long. I smiled at the memory. She would have forgiven, sooner or later. And you? He looked me straight in the eye. Would you be able to forgive? I wondered. Could I? After all the years of neglect, after the betrayal, when I needed help the most? I don't know, Knox, I answered honestly. Part of me has already forgiven. But the other part, it needs time. I don't want to promise anything I'm not sure of. He nodded, accepting my answer. I understand. And I'm already grateful that you agreed to meet, to hear me out. We talked for another hour or so, about his new job, about my life at Saltcombe, about Phineas and his friends, about the library where I was helping, about the museum in Torquay. I told him about Beatrice and he listened attentively without interrupting. When I mentioned that we sometimes went to concerts together at the local club, I saw surprise in his eyes and then understanding. "You've started a new life," he said without reproach. "A real new life?" "Yeah," I nodded. "And you know what? I don't regret it. I wish I'd done it sooner. I regret the years I spent waiting, hoping that something would change on its own." "I understand." He lowered his head. "And I'm sorry I was the cause of that waiting." When we finally said goodbye at the hotel entrance, the rain had stopped and the sun was shining through the clouds. Knox held out his hand to me and I shook it. Then after a second's hesitation, he hugged me briefly, tentatively, as if he was afraid I'd push him away. "Thank you, Father," he said quietly, "for listening, for not closing the door completely." "Take care of yourself, Knox," I replied. I'll call you when I'm ready." He nodded, got in his car and drove away. I watched the car drive away, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, sadness, a quiet hope for something I couldn't quite put a name to. When I got back to my room, I sat by the window and looked for a long time at the street, at the passers-by going about their business, at the rain clouds moving away from the horizon. I thought about our conversation with Knox, about his remorse, about my unwillingness to forgive too quickly. Was it pride or a defense mechanism, fear of being disappointed again? Or just the wisdom I'd gained over the years, knowing that real change took time and effort, not just pretty words? I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that I wasn't ready to return to Lancaster, not ready to resume my old relationship with my son. Too much water had passed, too deep a wound. But maybe in time. In the evening, I met Mrs. Pemberton again. We sat in her garden, drank tea, and talked about the day. "Had you seen Knox?" she asked cautiously. "Yes," I nodded. "A long, hard talk." She looked at me hopefully. "Did you make up?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. Let's just say we opened the door for a possible reconciliation in the future. But right now I'm going back to Saltcombe." She sighed. "I see. It's probably even better this way. You can't glue a broken cup back together in one day." "Exactly," I smiled at her wisdom. "Exactly, Eleanor." I left Lancaster the next morning with a light heart. Meeting Knox hadn't brought immediate reconciliation, but it had given us both what we needed most: honesty. I finally told him how much he'd hurt me. He finally admitted his mistakes. It wasn't the end, but it wasn't a new beginning either. More like the cleansing needed to move on, each to their own way, at least for now. The train was taking me back to the sea, to the new life I had built for myself, to Phineas, to Beatrice, to the library and the museum, to morning walks along the shore and evening conversations to the sound of the surf. I didn't know if Knox would play a role in this new life. Time would tell. In the meantime, I had freedom. Freedom from expectations, from disappointment, from pain that had been building up for years. And that freedom was worth any price. The seasons in Saltcombe didn't change as abruptly as they did in Lancaster. Autumn flowed smoothly into mild winter with occasional frosts. Spring came early and never gave way to summer. I've lived here for almost a year now, and I've learned to notice these subtle transitions, the hues of the sea, the kinds of birds coming into the harbor, the way the light changes at sunset. Today was a special day, the anniversary of my move to Saltcombe. Phineas had insisted on a small celebration, and now our garden was full of guests. Beatrice brought homemade dandelion wine, Harry and Monica Baxter brought crab cake, Thomas Lloyd, a local artist, gave me a watercolor of a view of Saltcombe Bay. All these were people I didn't know a year ago, but now called friends. "To Cormac," Phineas raised a toast, "to a year of new life, and to many years to come." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Not from the wine, but from the realization that I was no longer alone. That I have people who appreciate me simply because of who I am, not because I'm someone's father or the owner of a house that will someday be theirs. The last year has changed me more than the previous 10. After returning from Lancaster, after talking to Knox, I made the decision to live in the present instead of the past. I sold my part of the cottage to Phineas, symbolically for £1, and officially became a resident of Saltcombe. I got a local library card, joined the bridge club, became a regular visitor to the Seahorse. My duties at the library expanded from cataloging books to giving monthly lectures on geology to local school children. It amused me to see the children's eyes light up when I showed them samples of minerals from my collection, how mountains formed, and how the Earth's landscape has changed over millions of years. At Torquay Museum, I also progressed from being just a consultant to curator of the geology section. I traveled there by bus once a week, taking inventories, writing descriptions for new exhibits, and sometimes leading tours for tourists. It was an unusual activity for someone my age, but it gave me a sense of need, a sense of purpose that I had missed in my last years in Lancaster. Knox called me every month. Our conversations were polite but low-key. I told him about my life at Saltcombe, and he shared news about his work and how his career as a freelance editor was going. He didn't mention Anoka again, and I didn't ask. It was clear their relationship was over for good. In March, Knox sent me his first book, a literary guide to the Lake District that he had compiled and edited. On the front cover was written, "To my father who taught me to see beauty in rocks. I may not have become a geologist, but your lessons in attention to detail have not gone to waste. With gratitude, Knox." I was touched by the gesture, calling to thank him. Our conversation was warmer than usual, and at the end he asked what I'd been subconsciously waiting for and dreading. "Dad, I'd like to come visit you. Just for a visit, for a day or two, if you don't mind." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to see my son, to show him my new life, to introduce him to my friends. But the other part, the more cautious part, still remembered the pain of betrayal. "I'll think about it, Knox," I said finally. "Give me time." He didn't push, didn't insist, and I was grateful for that. He was changing, slowly but surely. He was becoming more attentive, more empathetic. Or maybe he'd always been like that, but Anoka had suppressed those qualities, emphasizing others, calculating, cold, ambitious. I discussed Knox's possible visit with Phineas and Beatrice. They both felt I should give my son a chance. "He's trying to mend relationships, Cormac," Beatrice said as we strolled along the promenade. "It means a lot." "I know," I sighed, "but I'm not sure I'm ready to let him into my new life. What if he disappoints me again? What if he doesn't?" She looked at me with her wise brown eyes. "What if this is a chance not only for him, but for you? A chance to let go of the past for good?" I pondered her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe the final step to complete freedom wasn't avoiding Knox, but accepting him for who he was, without expectation, without hope that he'd be the son I'd always dreamed of. And yet I wasn't ready. Every time I almost dared to invite Knox over, something stopped me. A memory of those sick days when I'd been laid up with pneumonia, and he'd chosen Inoki's party over helping his father. I knew it was unhealthy stubbornness, knew I should let go of the resentment, but I couldn't. Not now. I ended up writing Knox a letter, explaining that I wasn't ready for his visit yet, but appreciated his eagerness to repair the relationship. Promised that we'd be sure to meet when I was ready. His reply was short and understanding. "I will wait, Father, as long as it takes." Life, meanwhile, went on as usual. In June, there was a seafood festival in Saltcombe, and I had my first taste of cooking mussels using a local recipe. In July, Phineas, Beatrice, and I went to London to see the mineral exhibition at the Natural History Museum. It was the first time I'd been to the capital for many years, and I marveled at how it had changed. In August, I started writing a book, not a scientific work on geology, but simple stories about rocks and minerals for children, illustrated with my own photographs. Beatrice increasingly took a place in my life. We often took walks together, went to the local movie theater, and discussed books. She was intelligent, educated, with a subtle sense of humor. With her, I could talk about everything: literature, politics, life and death. She understood me half a word, as Winifred once did. One evening, as we sat on a bench by the sea watching the sunset, she took my hand. That simple gesture changed something between us. We didn't talk about feelings. It seemed unnecessary at our age. We just knew we were good together, and that was enough. Phineas, noticing the change in our relationship, just winked at me. It's about time, old boy. Beatrice is a wonderful woman, and she makes you smile. In September, I received a letter from Mrs. Pemberton. She wrote that the Fishers were finishing renovating the house and were planning a small reception for the neighbors. They have kept many of the features of the old house, she wrote, but have added some of their own. I think you would like it, Mr. Blackwood. It's like the house has taken on a new life. Those words made me think. The house had taken on a new life, and so had I. We've both changed, moved on. And maybe it was time to take another step forward. I called Knox that same night. I've been thinking about your visit, I said without preamble. Sumatra, if the offer still stands, I'd love to see you. In October, on the anniversary of my move, I heard his convulsive breath in the receiver, and then a quiet one. Thank you, Father. I'll be there. And now, on the anniversary, I stood in the garden, among friends, and waited for my son's arrival. Knox was supposed to arrive by 4, but it was almost 5, and I was beginning to worry. Had he changed his mind, or had something happened on the road? He'll be here. Beatrice seemed to read my mind, coming over with 2 glasses of wine. The roads are always busy on weekends. I nodded, accepting a glass. We sat in the wicker chairs, watching Phineas talk passionately to Thomas Lloyd, waving his arms for emphasis. You're nervous, Beatrice said. A little, I admitted. Knox wasn't a part of this life, my new life. I don't know how he'll fit in. Not unless you let him, she shrugged. It's up to you, Cormac, on whether you're willing to let him back in. I pondered her words. Was I ready? A year ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal no. Now I wasn't so sure. The pain had dulled, the anger had faded. All that remained was the weariness of unfulfilled expectations, and perhaps a quiet hope that things could still change. The sound of a car pulling up interrupted my musings. Knox had arrived. I watched him get out of the car, pull his suitcase from the trunk, look around uncertainly. He looked better than he had the last time I'd seen him in Lancaster, less exhausted, calmer. And something else had changed about him. His posture, his expression. I couldn't pinpoint it. I rose to meet him, and our eyes met across the garden. He smiled, tentatively, questioningly. I nodded, inviting him in. Father, he said as he approached. I'm sorry I'm late. Traffic on the highway. That's okay, I shook his hand. You're just in time for dinner. I introduced him to all the guests, starting with Phineas and ending with Beatrice. She was studying him particularly closely, and I realized that she was assessing how sincere his desire for a relationship with me was. The evening went better than I expected. Knox was polite, attentive, listened with interest to Phineas's stories about our student years, asked Thomas about his paintings, and discussed new literature with Beatrice. He didn't try to draw attention to himself, didn't talk about our past conflicts. He was simply here, part of the moment, part of the celebration. When the guests began to leave, Knox and I were left alone in the garden. The night was warm, the sea was sounding nearby, the stars twinkling in the sky. You have good friends, Knox said, looking up at the starry sky. Especially Beatrice. She's special to you, isn't she? I nodded. Yes, she understands me like few people ever have, except your mother. Knox smiled. I'm happy for you, Father. I really am. You look, happy. I am happy, I answered honestly. For the first time in a long time. We were silent, listening to the sound of the surf. You know, Knox began, not looking at me. When you left, I was angry. I felt betrayed, cheated. I thought you were just trying to punish me, to teach me a lesson. I stayed silent, giving him a chance to speak. But as time went on, he continued, I realized it wasn't an act of revenge. You just freed yourself. From your home, from your past, from me. Knox? No, let me finish. He held up his hand. I'm not blaming you. On the contrary, I'm grateful. Your departure has made me reevaluate my entire life. To realize that I've lived not by my own desires, but by other people's expectations. Inuka, her family, her ambition. I lost myself in it. He turned to me, and I saw a sincerity in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. I'm free now, he said quietly, and so are you. And I don't want to go back to the past. I don't want you to come back to Lancaster or feel obliged to keep close to me. I just want you to know that I've learned my lesson, and I'm grateful for it. I looked at my son, the man in whom I finally saw a reflection of myself, not outwardly, but inwardly. The same determination, the same yearning for freedom, the same ability to start anew despite fear and uncertainty. I don't hold it against you, Knox, I said finally. Not anymore. Maybe deep down I'm still resentful that you chose Inoki's party over helping me. But I realized that was a symptom, not the cause. The cause was deeper in the way our relationship changed after your mother died, in the way Inoka came between us, in the way we both let it happen. Knox nodded. I know, and I'm sorry too. I really am. Me too. I put my hand on his shoulder. But you know, maybe it's all for the best. If it hadn't been for your choice, or my illness, or my decision to leave, we'd both still be living our lives waiting for something that would never happen. And now we're both free. Both of us living in the present, not the past. You're wiser than I am, Father. Knox smiled. You always have been. No, I shook my head. Just older. I've had more time to make mistakes and learn from them. We talked late into the night, not about the past, about the present, about his new job, about my book, about Beatrice, about his plans to travel around Europe looking for inspiration for new guidebooks. It was a conversation between two adults respecting each other's choices, not father and son bound by obligations and expectations. When Knox left 2 days later, I didn't feel empty or regretful. I knew we would meet again, maybe in a month, maybe in a year. Not as family members obligated to keep in touch out of a sense of duty, but as people choosing to be around each other because they were good together. That evening I sat on the beach with Beatrice, watching the sunset. The sea was calm, with only light waves licking the sand at our feet. Sutton, what are you thinking about? She asked, noticing my pensive expression. Freedom, I answered, about how strangely it comes. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. She took my hand, and I felt the warmth of her fingers. Don't you have any regrets? About home? About your past life? I shook my head. No. Home was just a structure, a set of walls and roofs. A real home is where you feel free, where you can be yourself without masks and expectations. And where is your home now? She asked quietly. I looked at her, at the sea, at the sky colored by the sunset in shades of pink and gold. The world that had opened up to me at 77, when most people are already preparing to say goodbye to life. Here, I answered simply. My home is here, with you, with Phineas, with new friends, with the books I write, with the stones I collect, with the sea that changes every day, but always stays the same. Beatrice smiled and snuggled into my shoulder. We sat like that, in silence, watching the sun sink into the sea as day gave way to night. And I thought about how amazing life is. Unpredictable, full of losses and gains, disappointments and discoveries. And that the main thing is not to cling to the past, not to be afraid of the future, but to live in the present, every moment, every breath. At 77, I started a new life. And it was not the last chapter, but the first page of a new book. A book that I wrote myself, with my own words, with my own choices. A book where there was no room for regret and resentment, but only gratitude for each new day, for each opportunity to see the sun rise over the sea, to feel the warmth of Beatrice's hand, to hear Phineas laugh, to teach a child to distinguish granite from basalt. A book that was just beginning,